Brad Minlin.
That's what
Yeah.
we were
Was it
just
good?
making
Yeah,
sure
yeah,
that
it was
things
great.
are okay.
Yeah, it was fun. It was really fun. I was impressed by how inclusive they are. Even our students who are
Yeah, they're doing a great job.
looking for meaning
Yeah, they're doing a fantastic job.
without being doctrinaire. I thought it was really good.
And the students have loved it.
Oh, can we?
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening.
When you're done, can you pitch this
Good evening.
a little bit more like this so it's easier for us to see?
Good evening.
I see a notepad in there.
Good evening. Yes. Okay. Shalom and welcome to Temple Sinai Reno. We're very glad to have such a beautiful, diverse audience who chose to take time on their Wednesday evening at 5 o'clock to hopefully hear what we know is going to be a very informative and enlightening conversation about a real world issue that's so relevant today and in our community. I'm Jill Flandreich, and I'm chair of the Temple Sinai Library Committee. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Please silence your cell phones. Our restrooms are located across the lobby, and you'll see them as you exit later for our meet and greet and you enjoy our refreshments. The building exit would right now only be the front door where you came in. If you open any other doors, it will be an emergency. And many people are going to know it's an emergency. So please, if you're going to exit, use the front doors only. Our event is live streaming, and it will also be recorded and photographed. And I'd like to introduce the president of our congregation, Tova McGilvray, to give us some welcoming remarks.
Thank you, everyone, for being tonight. Can you hear me? All right, it is on. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, so much for being here this evening. Temple Sinai is honored to be the venue and the volunteer force behind tonight's discussion. Antisemitism is a malleable prejudice, and it is so important that we look at how it presents and transforms across history and across geography. So thank you all so much for being here tonight. I would like to thank our congregants who shared their experiences and concerns for anti-Semitism. And I'd like to thank our Temple Sinai Library Committee and Jewish Nevada for designing tonight's event in response to our community's needs. Thank you to our Building Grounds and Security Committee for shaping our physical and virtual space this evening. Thank you to our dignitaries for raising this topic in public spaces. Thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to our panelists and moderator for your scholarship, your research, and your time. We are all so honored by all of our volunteers and your attendance here tonight. Thank you. We would like to invite up our Rabbi Benjamin Zober to share some words.
If you will all turn to page 10 in your prayer books for... I'm sorry, it's a habit. This week, we read a portion of the Torah, Metzora. In it, we learn about Tzara'at, which is a plague that affects not only the skin and clothing, but can infect the walls of a house. It is possible for a structure to be so affected and so afflicted that it cannot be cleaned and has to be destroyed. The Talmud explains that Tzara'at is not like anything else. It is a spiritual malady caused by malicious speech, oaths taken in vain, and bloodshed, to name a few things. Swearing falsely and gossip, we can understand in some ways how those might go together, but bloodshed seems very different. But in Judaism, words are not mere utterances. They are things. In fact, the word devarim in Hebrew means words, and is both a word, but it also means thing. Words have weight, and they have significance. So it is understandable that words, particularly ones that are malicious or irreverent, could lead to violence and can cause damage. The subject of this evening is antisemitism, a word and one that carries great weight. Indeed, much, if not most, of the anti-Semitism that we encounter is through words. In the media, in conversation, old lies that are repeated again and again, frightening words. And they lead often to even more terrifying actions. Words become action. So we are here tonight to learn about how words and ideas about Jews often become actions and consequences. And so we also have to remember, though, that words can inspire us to goodness, to peace, to a better world. So I would like to leave you with the words of Rabbi Chaim Stern. Let us learn in order to teach. Let us learn in order to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Ben, for setting the tone for this evening. This event wouldn't be possible with the support of our sponsors this evening. We want to thank Jewish Nevada, Mara Langer, our Director of Community Engagement for Northern Nevada. And from the Edward Jones Skyline Branch, Joel Muller, their financial advisor. I want to thank everyone on our library committee who helped and is so supportive in putting this event together. It's been something we've been working on for many months. Catherine Sweezy, our co-chair, and our committee members, Ronan Kier, Renee Kier, Moshe Matthews, Maureen Leschendock, you may have met her at the front registration table, Barbara Weinberg, and Sue Capistrant. We want to thank also, as Tova did, you wouldn't be in this room and you wouldn't be watching it streaming without Michael Gordon and Tommy Seidel from our Buildings and Ground Committee. They put the entire facility, both virtually and physically, together, and we are so indebted to them. We want to thank Social Action Committee members who joined us tonight to help. The volunteers were Karen Rubin and Cookie Steinberg, and of course our own Rabbi Myra Seufer. Our Temple Sinai Board of Directors for all of their support in this program, and Mark Picker, who's the chair of Jewish Nevada's Northern Nevada Council. And thank you for being here. I'd like to introduce our co-chair for our library committee, Catherine Sweezy, and she's going to introduce our dignitaries tonight.
Thank you. We are thankful to our government officials who have recognized this important community-wide event. We appreciate their presence, be it in person through the representatives or on video. Their certificates and proclamations are on display in the lobby. On behalf of U.S. Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, we welcome Vivian Banda, Regional Representative. We're going to watch Senator Masto's video now.
Hello, this is U.S. Senator Catherine Cortez Masto. I want to thank the Temple Sinai Reno Library Committee, the Board of Directors, and today's sponsors and panelists for shining a light on such an important issue in our community. The Jewish community in Nevada is part of what makes our state so great. I'm lucky to have my good friend Jackie Rosen as my partner in the Senate, the first former synagogue president to ever serve in the Senate. We know that our diversity is what makes us strong. Unfortunately, in the aftermath of Hamas's attack on Israel, we have seen a spike in anti-Semitism in Nevada. Targeting someone based on their race, ethnicity, or religion is never acceptable, and we need to call it out when we see it. Hatred in all its forms is never to be tolerated in our state or anywhere in our country. And I will always stand with the Jewish community as we work to combat anti-Semitism in our neighborhoods. Thank you again for drawing attention to this critical issue.
On behalf of U.S. Senator Jackie Rosen, we are welcoming Molly Rose Lewis, Regional Representative. We're going to watch her video now.
Hi, I'm Senator Jackie Rosen, and it's my honor to represent all of you in the United States Senate. I'd like to thank the Board of Directors and the Library Committee of Temple Sinai Reno and everyone here for making this important event possible. I don't have to tell anyone in this room about the unprecedented rise in anti-Semitism that we've been witnessing across the country and around the world. Anti-Semitism has been on the rise for years, but it has skyrocketed since the Hamas terrorist attack on October 7th. From Jewish families being assaulted on the streets, to businesses and places of worship being vandalized, while to students being harassed on college campuses, Jewish Americans are being attacked for who they are. We must fight back against this hate and address anti-Semitism whenever we see it. As a former synagogue president and the only Jewish woman currently serving in the United States Senate, I've made it a priority to do everything I can at the federal level to combat anti-Semitism. I founded the first ever Senate bipartisan task force for combating anti-Semitism, and I've been leading it alongside Senator James Lankford from Oklahoma. I led the bipartisan effort to push the White House to create the first ever national strategy to combat anti-Semitism, which was released last May. And I'm also leading efforts to provide increased federal funding to protect synagogues and Jewish institutions from violence. Because no American should ever feel unsafe while practicing their faith. Since October 7th, we have seen an increase in attacks and incidences targeting Jewish students on college campuses. I've worked with Republicans and Democrats to make sure the Department of Education, that they remind schools of their legal responsibility to protect students from discrimination. And we know that one of the most powerful tools to combat anti-Semitism is education. That's why I recently introduced the bipartisan Never Again Education Reauthorization Act. This bill would reauthorize my Never Again Education Act, which established a federal fund to provide educators with resources to teach students the important lessons of the Holocaust. And, as we know, this work is far from over. We must stay vigilant and continue to work together to root out hate and bigotry. Please know that you have a partner in the Senate in the fight against anti-Semitism, and never hesitate to reach out to my office if you need assistance. Thank you.
Thank you. Both senators' proclamations are on display in the lobby. Congressman Mark E. Amade with appreciation for sending a certificate of recognition. On behalf of Nevada Governor Joe Lombardo, we welcome Madeline Burak, Legislative Director, to the podium for her special message.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for your kind introduction. It's great to see a lot of very familiar faces here. My name is Madeline Burak, and I am proud to serve as Governor Lombardo's Legislative Director. The Governor certainly wishes he could have been here this evening, but I am very honored to share a few words on his behalf. Before I get started, I want to also take a moment to thank Temple Sinai for hosting us this evening, as well as Jewish Nevada for your continued support, and also our panelists and moderator for this important and very timely discussion. First, let me start by saying that the Governor and the state of Nevada stand strongly with the Jewish community in the face of anti-Semitism. The rise in anti-Semitism is indeed alarming and something that the Governor and our staff have been tracking very closely. It is of the utmost importance that all Nevadans, regardless of their background, feel safe and that we work diligently to keep our Jewish communities throughout Nevada secure. Just recently, and I'm sure we'll hear about this tonight, but just recently, the Anti-Defamation League released its audit for 2023. It recorded 8,873 anti-Semitic incidents in this country, which is a 14% increase over 2022 and a tenfold increase over a decade ago. This includes physical assaults, bomb threats against synagogues, vandalism, and other horrific anti-Semitic incidents. Of these over 8,000 incidents, 7,523 of them were recorded just last year following the Hamas massacre on October 7th. To the people in this room and in our greater Jewish community, I know that these statistics are more than just numbers in a report because we are living them. We have experienced the threats to our shuls, the fear Jewish children have when they hear anti-Semitic slurs from their fellow students, and when social media and the news share nonstop footage of people shouting for our destruction and ultimately completely deny our very right to exist, we feel this to our core. I want to tell you that this issue is of the highest importance to Governor Lombardo. Before his time serving as governor, he served as the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department as the sheriff for 2 terms. During his time as sheriff, he was able to create a working group on anti-Semitism for the Las Vegas community, which still meets to this day. It was and continues to be the governor's priority to work with the Jewish community stakeholders and leaders to combat this and ensure that we are keeping Nevadans safe. In closing, as I said at the outset, it is the goal and priority of the governor to make all Nevadans feel safe and accepted as vital members of our great state. Our office will continue to do everything we can to be a resource and assist wherever possible. So thank you. May God bless America. May God bless Israel. And may God bless the great state of Nevada.
Thank you. And the proclamation is also on display in the lobby. From the city of Reno, we welcome Vice Mayor Naomi Dewar to the podium for her special message.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I'm Naomi Dewar. I'm a Reno City Council member and currently the Vice Mayor of the city of Reno. It's truly an honor to be here tonight. A sad honor, but an honor nevertheless. As some of you may know, that I did a little research and I determined that it looks like I am the first elected Jewish person on the Reno City Council in 100 years. Now a little bit over 100 years. There have been some temporary subs, but it looks like it's me. It is a big responsibility to carry. I feel like I am representing all Jews all the time, and probably many of you do too, because it's what we do as individuals that makes a difference on our community. Anti-Semitism is, it's a stunning and shocking event. One of the things that we can do as a community is to show up for each other. One of the ways that we've been doing it at the city of Reno is to annually light the Hanukkah menorah, to bring our events out of the shadows and into the public sphere is, I think, an important step in fighting against anti-Semitism. I'm incredibly, I was astonished really, and several members here participated or experienced this with me. Recently, one of our council members wanted to make a donation to Jewish Nevada. And it was a very small donation, $500. And yet that small donation drew a large response from the community who thought that we should maybe give that money to the homeless, not to the Jewish people, not to security for Jewish events. And I myself was inspired by my colleagues' act to also give money, as did 2 other of my colleagues, including the mayor. And so we had, again, a repeat performance. We gave, this time, $1,000 each, so $3,000. And this time there was even a larger response against that donation, saying people didn't want the money going to Israel. The people didn't want the money supporting whatever it was supposed to be. They didn't really care. And I will say that it really stirred up something. A number of people here in the audience or that will hear speak tonight were present when it happened, and we were all mortified. And it caused me, for one of the first times in my political career, 10 years I've been on city council, to actually speak up and say, this is anti-Semitic. The words that you're speaking Why would you single out just a donation to the Jewish people, to the Jewish organization, not other religions, not other public organizations, not other nonprofits, only this one? It kind of reminds us of words that we hear in Passover. Why is this night different from all other nights? Why this donation caused such a stir? Well, I think it speaks to the issues that we're talking about tonight, which is that there is growing anti-Semitism in our community and in our country. And it's very important that we stand up and take a stand against it. I too have brought a proclamation from our mayor to recognize this special event that we're having. And I too want to thank everyone that has put their energy, heart, and effort into making tonight possible. So thank you for having us, organizers. Thanks for including me in the program. And I can't wait to see what we learned tonight from our panel speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Her proclamation is in the lobby. Finally, we also welcome Chief Justice of the Nevada Supreme Court, Alyssa Kaddish. Thank you.
And now, as they say, on with the show. I'd like to introduce our moderator for this evening, Mara Langer, Director of Community Engagement for Jewish Nevada in Northern Nevada. And much of Mara, we kind of condensed her bio. I was going to read a lot more, and I asked her what she wanted, and she struck out a lot of it and just said to jump to, much of Mara's free time is spent with family and volunteering for various organizations. She is currently a member of the Governor's Advisory Council on the Education of the Holocaust and a board member of Art for All Nevada. She lives in Reno with her husband, kids, and 2 dogs. Please welcome our moderator for this evening, Mara Langer.
I think you'll all agree that, well, first of all, thank you, Jill. I appreciate that. But I think you all agree that our panelists are far more interesting than I am. So I get the honor of introducing them. And I think what I'm going to do, I've put some thought into this actually, is that I'm going to introduce each one individually, have them speak, and then introduce the next one. Because if I introduce them all together, then you're going to forget the qualifications of the one that before, right? And they're all so esteemed. I just want them to.
It can be short.
All right, so here we go. James McSpadden is an assistant professor of modern European history at the University of Nevada, Reno. He holds a PhD in history from Harvard University, an MA from Dutch Studies in Leiden University, and a BA in German Studies from Yale. So in your house, there's not much of a competition then, right? Like Yale, Harvard, it just all whatever, right? He researches and publishes in on European politics between the world wars and is currently working on the history of Nazi book looting and the redistribution of these Holocaust-era books across the United States after World War II. His research has been supported by the American Historical Association, the American Council on Germany, I'm not going to say that, the German Academic Exchange Service, and the German Historical Institute in Washington, D.C. At UNR, Dr. McSpadden teaches courses on modern European history, including 2 course series on the Holocaust and its historical legacies. Tonight, we are honored to have Dr. McSpadden speak to us on the origins of modern anti-Semitism in Europe. Take it away.
All right. Thanks very much for having me. Thanks for that very kind introduction. I have been given for a historian, it's an enviable task. I was told, please describe the origins of anti-Semitism from the very beginning to the Holocaust in 15 minutes. So that I literally teach 2 classes on the Holocaust. I don't know how I do everything, including the Holocaust, in 15 minutes. So what I have decided to do is condense things quite a lot and maybe go over 15 minutes. We'll see what exactly happens. What I'm going to do to actually explore what I think we've heard a lot of recently is that anti-Semitism, I actually was listening to Senator Schumer. We've heard from 2 senators tonight. Senator Schumer calls anti-Semitism an ancient poison, the oldest hatred. All of this very well may be true. But we as historians are often interested in how things change over time. Anti-Semitism has not always been the same. It's changed over time. And I'm going to start with a moment of hope. If anti-Semitism's changed over time, that means it can change in the future too. And it could even maybe go away. So anti-Semitism can change. It's the first time I've ever gotten an applause for something historical. Now it's going to get very grim. I'm going to warn you about all the horrible pictures I'm going to show. But it is possible that my argument as a historian, we historians always like to have an argument. Anti-Semitism has changed over time. And to show you this, I'm going to go to 4 different times in 4 different places. We're going to go to ancient Rome. We're going to talk about early Roman, Greco-Roman. Sometimes it's called anti-Semitism. The historical and Jewish studies consensus is we should call it xenophobia, anti-Jewish xenophobia in ancient Rome. Then we're going to go to ancient Antioch. We're going to go to, it's now Turkey. We're going to, around the year 400, we're going to talk about the rise of Christianity and Christian anti-Judaism. We're going to go to medieval Norwich. So we're going to go to England. And then we're going to finally come to the time period I know something about. And we're going to stop in a coffee house in Vienna around the year 1900. So let's get started going all the way back to ancient Rome, which all of you probably know was the capital of the Roman Empire. You might not know there actually was a Jewish community in Rome. In Rome in the year 100 BCE, so before the Common Era, before Rome had actually even annexed Judea, there was a Jewish community in Rome. One of the oldest old synagogue buildings in the entire world is this. You can see right here. It's in Ostia, which is the seaport of Rome. So there was a Jewish community in ancient Rome. Romans encountered Jews, maybe not on a day-to-day basis, but in their ordinary lives. And sometimes when non-historians, non-academics talk about anti-Semitism, they start with anti-Semitism with this image. Some of you might have seen it. It's the Arch of Titus. It's from around the year 100. It was built to honor or to mark the conquest of Vespasian and Titus by the Emperor Domitian. And this, you can see right here, a menorah. The menorah is actually here. It's a relief, a menorah. And these are actually all of the artifacts that were inside of Herod's temple when in the year 70, the temple is destroyed. The Romans march off Jews into slavery. They loot everything in the temple and they raze the temple to the ground. Sometimes we think of this as anti-Semitism, but think for a second about war memorials that America has built of triumphant past. This feels more like a war memorial. It should be thought of in the context of a war memorial with the xenophobia that's often created in the midst of wars. And this was for the crushing of the great Jewish revolt. But maybe you say, let's think more about what exactly this xenophobia looks like in the Roman Empire. And I actually have a text from the Roman satirist Juvenal that I want to read with all of you. It is xenophobic. Romans liked making fun of other people. They did this a lot. They found ethnic group, made up ethnic stereotypes. And these are what the ancient Romans said, or Juvenal in his satire said of the Jews. Then there are those that, blessed with a father who reveres the Sabbath, worship only the clouds in the sky and its spirit. What are the Romans saying there? So they're saying Jews, they're surprised. What they're thinking about is the ethnic stereotype. Why aren't they worshiping like everyone else who worship statues and images? We would say idols. They worship the sky. They seem different. They seem odd. They draw no distinction between the pork from which their father had to abstain and human flesh. As far as Romans and Greeks were concerned, pork was the most delicious kind of meat. Why are the Jews not eating it? They find that strange about the Jews, and who swiftly rid themselves even of their foreskins. It's supposed to be a joke, but imagine men exercise in the nude. Jews could then be identified, male Jews, as being circumcised. It's their custom to ignore the laws of Rome, the Judaic code being that which they study, adhere to, and revere, the Pentateuch, the mystic scroll handed down by Moses. Nor do they reveal the way to anyone but a fellow believer, leading only the circumcised when asked to the fountain. This is the Roman ethnic stereotype that Jews were clannish. They spent time with one another. But you have to imagine if a Roman goes to their Jewish neighbor and says, will you come and have a nice big dinner with me? And we're going to have all this sacrificial wine afterwards that was dedicated to Jupiter. A Jew would have to say no. So there's this idea in the time that Jews spend time with themselves because of kashrut, because of the need to keep kosher. And finally, another ancient stereotype, it's the fathers that's to blame, treating every seventh day as a day of idleness, separate from the rest of daily life. This is the idea that Jews in the ancient world were seen as lazy, because they take one day of the work week off, one day of the week off. Everyone else works 7 days, but Jews actually honor the Sabbath. They take Shabbat. They're religiously mandated to do this. So you see, these are ethnic stereotypes, very much like noxious, problematic ethnic stereotypes we might see today. But the interesting thing about the history of anti-Semitism is every stage, some of these things are things that might be part of anti-Semitic tropes today. Every stage of anti-Semitism, there's a new level, these older tropes can be pulled in and changed in the next era. And the next era is that of Christianity, which really changes how anti-Semitism looks. So now we're going to Antioch, to ancient Antioch. This is a Greek metropolis on the Eastern Mediterranean. It was the capital of the Seleucid Empire, and it was a melting pot. There were Jews and Christians who lived together in the Jewish neighborhoods. This is actually a Christian artifact from the time period. It's a chalice or maybe an oil lamp. We're not really sure, from about the year 500. It's really important in early Christian history. It's actually, according to the New Testament and the Acts of the Apostles, the first time the word Christian was ever used was in Antioch, and it's often called the cradle of Christianity as well. The interesting thing for the history of anti-Semitism is we get a new era of anti-Semitism, Christian anti-Judaism. And the problem here is Christians and Jews are living side by side. And Christians say, why are we that different from Jews? We come from a similar faith. This idea of what the relationship is unclear. So Christians would often go to Shabbat services. They would every Rosh Hashanah, they wanted to hear the shofar being blown. And certain Christian bishops, especially this man, John Chrysostom, said, I have to oppose that. He opposed Judaizers. It's actually a word in the New Testament in Galatians, but he opposes Judaizers and Jews and preaches in a series of sermons called Against the Jews. He says Jews are demonic. Synagogues are the place of vice. Christians cannot go there. This is the wrong place to be because Jews are Christ killers. This is a new form of anti-Semitism that comes out of Christianity, where it's the relationship between Christianity and Judaism. How are they in relationship to each other? So Christian anti-Semitism looks very different, and you see it in medieval architecture tropes all the time. This is very common. This is ecclesia et synagoga. Ecclesia, the church. You see the crown. God has selected the church. A chalice representing the Christian Eucharist. A triumphant banner. How is Judaism portrayed? Synagoga, blindfolded. A blindfolded woman. Her crown has fallen off. She has tablets, but they're upside down. The javelin used to pierce the side of Christ is broken. So this idea of mother and daughter, mother religion, daughter religion, Christianity trying to distance itself from Judaism is really important in the ancient world. So now we get new tropes. Jews as Christ killers. Earlier we had Jews as kind of xenophobically different. Things then intensify in the medieval period. And now we're going to go to England. Medieval Norwich. Norwich was the center of the wool trade in England. It was a really important and wealthy city. They had a port. Today, I've actually never been to Norwich, but I learned so much for this talk about it. Now I really want to go. They advertise themselves as the most medieval town in all of England. And they will take you to one building, this ugly, hideous pink building right here, the music. I don't know why they painted it pink. The music house. And they will show you the building and say it's the oldest building in Norwich. And a really good tour guide will tell you that actually the basement, the undercroft, was part of a Jewish building, the Jewish community that was there before 1290 in Norwich. In fact, we know there was a French-speaking, actually, Jewish community in Norwich from the year at least. There was one Jew listed in the Doomsday Book, but we know there was a community by 1130. It was a community of moneylenders. Jews were allowed to lend money. Christians were not. There was a prohibition on usury, so there were moneylenders, scholars, but there was even a poet. We still have the poetry of a man who lived in Norwich that's actually preserved today in a manuscript at the Vatican. So this was a really vibrant Jewish community. Think about 200 Jews who lived. They actually lived right here under the Norman Keep, which you see right here. We can still see this building. Why is Norwich so important? Because in 1144, on Easter, William of Norwich went missing. He was a 12-year-old. He was an apprentice, and he ended up dead. He was dead, and people asked what happened. Of course, the crowds, the English-speaking, the Anglo-Saxons who were there, the English-speaking folks in Norwich said it must have been the Jews. The Jews have supposedly, none of this happened, supposedly, like Jesus, crucified him shaved his hair, put a crown of thorns on him, and somehow collected his blood. A monk named Thomas of Monmouth took up this story, wrote it all down. It spread like wildfire in England. Yet the next Easter and Passover, so Pesach, which we're going to celebrate not that long from now, often coincides with Easter. And there is, and the idea is the Jews will yet again take a child, use their blood to make matzah. This old lie. It gets a new permutation in Germany in 1243 in a town called Belitz. In fact, the host, in Catholic theology, the actual body of Christ, transubstantiated body of Christ, was stolen by Jews. And since Jews killed Jesus, yet again, we're going to stab the host, reenact this ancient murder. Jews were accused of all of these things. So we get these new forms of anti-Semitism, these new forms of hate in the medieval period, or new ideas. It's really sad to say it, but it's like the anti-Semites are innovating. And they found a new idea. They took this old idea of Jews as Christ killer, and they added, they're doing it again. And many of you might think the Jews are alone. But in fact, actually, the Jews had allies, and they're very strange people you wouldn't expect. Guess who said the blood libel was fake? The Pope, multiple popes, Gregory X, Innocent IV, Innocent III. And when the Jews of Norwich, the town I just showed you, when the Jews of Norwich were accused of the blood libel, they ran immediately to the keep of the Norman lord. People who didn't get there, unfortunately, were killed. There was a pogrom at the end of the century, and we know, actually, 2 years ago in 2022, they found bones that they know are actually Jews who were probably thrown down a well. But we actually know that everyone who got into the castle survived. They were protected by the lords. So you get almost this folk Catholicism mixed with anti-Semitism from below. So now we've moved on to a new era. This era of persecution, sometimes medievalists call this, these are persecuting societies. We see persecution over and over again, ends with expulsions. In 1290, King Edward I expels all the Jews of England. This is actually an image of that in a codex we have. You actually see right here, this is the Jewish badge required to be worn by Jews in England. That looks like 2 tablets, and they are being forced out of England, expelled in 1290. So when Shakespeare, for example, is imagining Shylock, no one in living memory had met a Jew in England. They had been expelled. So Jews are expelled from England in 1290, and you see more and more and more expulsions, often where people are seeking refuge in the East. So this is medieval anti-Semitism ending an expulsion. But now I want to take you again, the innovations in anti-Semitism, to the year 1900, to a Viennese coffee house. Perhaps it was the Café Landsmann, which was Freud's favorite haunt. He would go there all the time. Imagine it's 1900, you go to have your coffee in Vienna, and you pass an advertisement like this, or a poster like this. This is German Christians Save Austria. Note the racialized image of a snake, red, evoking the idea that Jews are socialist or communist, strangling the eagle, the symbol of Austria. This is what you see on the street. You might, in that coffee house, you're going to pick up the news. It's 1900. What's the biggest international news of the day? Of course, it's the Dreyfus affair. Alfred Dreyfus, and a French artillery captain, was accused of spying for Germany. He was convicted multiple times of this, even though he didn't do it. I always ask my students, how do we know he didn't do it? Because if there's a spy and then he's convicted and sent off to Devil's Island and someone is still spying, the Germans are still getting the information, he didn't do it. And it was really clear to the French military he didn't do it because the spying was still going on. But instead, there was an anti-Semitic fervor. Just imagine social media today. Mass media was that at the time. In the Viennese coffee house, you could pick up crazy anti-Semitic images of Dreyfus. Here, horrific anti-Semitic images. The Jew, this actually says under it, their home country, their country, their patrie. That Jews have no country, they're citizens of nowhere, with these horrible caricatures. You could get these anywhere, in Vienna, all over the place. What has happened in the 19th century? This is really important. Again, the anti-Semites innovate. And they innovate with new ideas in the 19th century of scientific racism and eugenicism. As Europeans are going out, they're categorizing the races of the world. They say, where do Jews fit in? They don't. Or maybe they're a race by themselves. And we know this is important because when does the word anti-Semitism come from? 1879, 1880. It was invented by this man, Wilhelm Marr. Why did he come up with the word anti-Semite? It's strange. because the traditional German word for hating Jews was literally Jew hate. Juden, yeah, so you don't want to say that. Judenhass, Judenfeindlich, in German, Jew hate. So he needed a word that sounded more socially acceptable. And what sounds more scientific in this era of scientific racism than anti-Semitic? So he comes up with this word. So it's an anti-Semite's word to say his project. So what is the issue? So people take this up. Politicians take this up. So what does this mean? What does this mean? Well, who are to blame for all the problems? It's the Jews. So in this horrible caricature, you see a Jewish man being hounded by someone. This was the mayor of Vienna, Karl Lueger, in 1900. So this is an era of anti-Semitism that's polluted by notions of race. So when we looked in the earlier periods, this is I think a way that I always try to get my students to understand differences. When we look at earlier eras of anti-Semitism, the expulsions of Jews, Christian anti-Semitism, the virulence of the past is really important. But there actually was always a trap door. If someone didn't want to leave, they could convert. And always, with the possible exception of Spain, they were allowed to stay. The mob stopped once someone was Christian. That changed in the 19th century. And this is because there's the confluence of racial thought with what it means to be Jewish. So we move away. We started with, the problem is Judaism is a backwards religion, said the Christians. That was the problem. Now it's Jews as such, as a racial group. So in this long history, we started in Rome, we ended now in Vienna. The thing that's important to remember is all of these old tropes can come back. So in the Nazi era, we see that the problem with anti-Semitism is all of these ideas are like a smorgasbord. And an anti-Semite can go and pick something from the 1st century or from the 15th and put them together. So when the Nazis were using propaganda in Poland in 1943, this says the Jew is the mortal enemy of Christianity. Jew as Christ killer. They're going back to this ancient idea. This is a Nazi newspaper. It says yet another ritual murder, blood libel. This is in the 1940s, and the Nazis are going back to 1144. Or this idea, Jews as moneylenders. This is Slovak, a Nazi ally, or an ally of Nazi Germany. It says, don't be a servant to the Jew. This is an older idea that Jews are moneylenders. Jews are economically privileged somehow. So the issue when we look at the history of anti-Semitism, what it's done is it's provided an entire set of anti-Semitic tropes that people can pull from today. And unfortunately, some of these things that I just showed you from the distant past might be things that echo with what you see today in this kind of uptick of anti-Semitism we have in our present. So that was anti-Semitism from the beginning to about the Nazi period, as fast as I could make it. Thank you very much. All right, 19 minutes. Okay, here you go, Dennis. Oh, wait.
So
Yes.
thank you so much, James.
19 minutes.
19 minutes. All right. It's sitting, but standing on one foot, right? So that was so amazing and overwhelming. And I'm sure you all have a lot of questions to ask him, and you will have an opportunity to ask questions, but we're going to get through all of our panelists before we go into questions. So just kind of take what I keep wanting to call him by his name, what James said, and absorb it. And then let's listen to our next speaker, who is Dr. Dennis Dworkin. Dennis Dworkin is a professor in the history department at the University of Nevada, Reno. He is also a member of Temple Sinai, correct? Yes. He is a cultural historian of Britain and Ireland, and most recently the United States. His books and essays have been translated into Chinese, Turkish, and Portuguese. His most recent publication is a chapter on the United States for the Cambridge History of Terrorism, 1921. So Dr. Dworkin is going to talk to us for understanding anti-Semitic representations of Jews today. He's going to focus on anti-Semitism specifically in Detroit between the two world wars, highlighting the relevance of Henry Ford and Father Charles Coughlin. You got a lot of mms in there. All right. So through a different lens, here you go.
Okay. So thank you very much, Mara. I'm really honored to be here and to be with such amazing colleagues. And so my talk is like the micro is instead of the macro, because first of all, I'm not an American historian. I became an American historian by fate rather than by choice. People just keep asking me to do things. And secondly, this is really semi-autobiographical. That is, it's an exploration into my own past because I'm born in Detroit, and Detroit has played a huge role in my life. But like James Joyce, who is obsessed with Ireland, he just could never live there. So I want to start with talking about actually 3 pictures. I think it was an earlier version of this was 4, but I think it's now 3. And I want to say as an introduction that I'm looking into really the world of my grandparents. And along the way, historians just find things, right? So anti-Semitism in Detroit is just part of a much larger history of Detroit, which would include the 1937 strikes at General Motors, where the UAW was recognized for the first time, or the 1943 race riots in Detroit, in which 25 African Americans were killed. So one should think in broader terms always, but I am speaking about this one specific aspect because it's, certainly all on our minds. So I want to begin with this picture.
Next one.
There you go.
And this is my father, Joseph Dworkin, second on the top left, who was a private in the 17th Field Artillery Observation Battalion of the U.S. Army. And here my dad was at Normandy, the liberation of Paris, the Battle of the Bulge, and the liberation of concentration camps. And this photograph, I always have to explain it. He is conquering the Nazis. But it's an amazing photograph. And I think my father would be amazed that we're sitting here having this discussion after the sacrifices that his generation went through. And so I start with this photograph because, one photograph too soon, because I grew up in the golden age. I grew up in the golden age of America. I grew up in the golden age of Jews, where really for the first time, I think it's pretty safe to say that we were almost just another ethnic group. And I remember growing up in Detroit, there are Irish Americans, there's Polish Americans, Italian Americans. What we were not was WASPs, a word that is sort of lost currency over time. And as a period in the history of Jews in America, I mean, it's really extraordinary. It's extraordinary in terms of the entertainment industry. I mean, I could go on and on about Jewish comedy, and I have done this in the past. And writers like Saul Bellow or Norman Mailer or Philip Roth, Leonard Bernstein in music. I mean, it's an extraordinary period. And the Atlantic, just a month or so ago, said, we are at the end of the golden age. And for me, the golden age ended in during the Charlottesville March of 2017, because besides the fact that it was shocking that it was a Nazi march and given such attention, this photograph, the most reproduced in the world for 2017, was a UNR student. And not only was he a UNR student, but as it happened, I became his advisor because the university decided he had to graduate. And it was one of the most difficult things that I've ever done as a professional. But I did it as a professional. We never had a discussion about his politics, because I don't have discussions with students about their politics unless they ask me. But when he gave his senior thesis presentation, which was about Irish nationalism, I should add, not particularly controversial. Protesters were the audience. I had to have the police come in. For the University of Nevada, Reno, this was an extraordinary event. And for me personally, it was a wake-up call. Oops, going backwards. And so this began a period of really kind of historical exploration of my past and the past of my grandparents. And I start with this picture of Greenfield Village. Has anyone been to Greenfield Village? Okay. It's great, right? I mean, it's really fantastic. I used to go as a kid. I grew up in the camera business. My dad's a photographer. We took pictures there many, many, many times. And it's the first outdoor museum in America, opened in 1933. Next door is the Henry Ford Museum, a history of technology. And very, very close by is the Ford Rouge plant, which at the time was a revolutionary venture into modern capitalism with the most advanced assembly line. But what Ford did was basically create mainstream America. He bought and reconstructed the Wright brothers' home, and next to it their bicycle shop. With Edison's help, who was his hero, he bought, or really brought, the Edison lab from Menlo Park and reconstructed exactly the way it was. And just to show the American heritage, he purchased a Cotswold cottage from England from the 17th century, which was brought over brick by brick. It's an amazing place. I still love it. But what one has to know about what's not said at Greenfield Village is that Henry Ford is a white supremacist who says the trouble with the U.S. today is that we have been unfaithful to the white man's traditions and privileges. He believed that immigrants in cities were doing away with American heritage, and most importantly, the Jews. In 1932, a Detroit news reporter interviewed Adolf Hitler before he was chancellor, and there's a photograph of Henry Ford. And Hitler said Ford was an inspiration. And the reason he was an inspiration was because in 1918, Ford bought a little known newspaper called the Dearborn Independent and turned it in to the most important anti-Semitic newspaper in America, in which it was circulated at every Ford dealer and given to customers when they bought their cars. What Ford published was a translation of the first translation in English, of the fraudulent Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was an attempt by the Russian secret police to discredit the Jews by creating a document in which the Jews were controlling the world. They are responsible for both communism and capitalism, a neat trick, I might add, but a trick nonetheless. And here's a few more images of the Dearborn Independent. Jewish jazz, moron music, becomes our national music. And I'm not even sure who he would have been referring to in 1920, because I don't really think that, I can't even think of a Jewish jazz musician. And then they're anthologized as a series of books called The International Jew, the World's Foremost Problem. So that's my second picture, although maybe Peter would, this might be my third picture, but this is technically my third picture. So this is the National Shrine of the Little Flower Basilica. And it's at Woodward and 12 Mile in Royal Oak, Michigan. Now a middle-class suburb. When it was, this tower was built in the 1930s, but the church actually opened in 1925, in which Royal Oak, Michigan would have been prominently farmland. And in fact, when it opened in 1925, the Ku Klux Klan put a burning cross on its lawn, a reminder that it's not only Jews that were discriminated against during this period. Protestants, particularly the Klan, saw Jews, Catholics, blacks, all as a great form of racism. And this church is half a mile from my father's camera business. When I was in my teens and 20s, used to drive by this all the time. I love it. It's absolutely beautiful. And the windows on the side, you can put lights in it. It illuminates at night. And it's absolutely extraordinary. The priest was Father Charles Coughlin, a Canadian priest born in Hamilton, Ontario, who moved to Windsor and then wanted to come to Detroit because it was a hotbed of anti-Semitism. And he had come to the conclusion, like Henry Ford, that anti-Semitism was the wave of the future. Anti-Semitism was all about not just Jews, but about communists, about atheists, about what he would say in the 1930s, the Jew deal of Franklin Roosevelt. And in the 1930s, over NBC radio, he had a listeners of something like 30 million people every Sunday night. He is the first prominent celebrity radio host of hate. And now we have I spent a long time looking for this video of him, which most of them are radio programs. So this gives you a flavor of what he was about.
My dear friends, that among other things in the National Union for Social Justice, we are Christian insofar as we believe in Christ's principle of love your neighbor as yourself, and with that principle, I challenge every Jew in this nation to tell me that he does not believe in it. There is no need of communizing all the factories and the fields and the forests and the mines under a new kind of God made of flesh and blood and clay and hatred. When men become so prideful that they believe their destiny is to rewrite the eternal law of God, it's time for their fellow citizens to rise up in their wrath and through the agency of ballots and not bullets to relegate them to the pages of the past. God bless you.
Organized by the Nazis, in which endless amounts of injury, lost property, tragedy took place. Father Coughlin said this: communist governments of Russia, the Lenins and Trotskys, atheist Jews and Gentiles had murdered more than 20 million Christians and had stolen $40 billion of Christian property. Therefore, Kristallnacht is a payback for the damage the Jews have done over the course of history. When Pearl Harbor came, Father Coughlin was silenced by NBC Radio, by the Catholic Church. The Postal Service wouldn't allow him to circulate his magazine or newspaper. But he spent the rest of his years as the priest of this church up until when he retired in the late 1960s, early 1970s. And in an interview before his death, he said, "I must take back nothing." So I want to end with a couple things. So on Sunday, I called my Aunt Una. She's 93, and I love her and respect her so much. She was born in 1930, so she remembers some of this. And I said to her, "What's the difference between now and then?" And she said, "Well, we were aware of all this, but we lived in a ghetto. Not a ghetto with walls, but a neighborhood with markets and shops and synagogues. And so we were very, very, tight-knit neighborhood, and we weren't that aware of all this. Now," she says, "it's worse because we're fragmented, because we live all over the place, because we have so many tensions and conflicts, and it's much harder to create unity." One more anecdote. This is a personal anecdote. So I became an historian because of baseball. My father, when I was 12 years old, taught me the lineup of the 1934 Detroit Tigers. In 1934, the Tigers were in the pennant race, and Hank Greenberg, the first great Jewish baseball player, had a dilemma because he had to play on Rosh Hashanah. His rabbi, through some passage in the Talmud that no one had ever heard of, decided it was okay. He hit 2 home runs. But the Detroit Free Press, on its sports page, in the traditional Hebrew greeting with Hebrew letters, said, "Happy New Year." Probably the first time that Hebrew letters had ever been printed in a major American newspaper, and to this day, nobody really can figure out where they got them from. So I want to end this talk with, despite all the darkness, there's always a little bit of light to fall back on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. That was really very interesting and I would actually say inspiring. I really learned a lot from both of those conversations. Next, we get to hear about anti-Semitism in the present. We heard the there, then, and we're coming to the now. And we have with us Elliot Malin, who is the president of Alpine Strategies, where he's worked on drafting and passing into law bills. Wait, sorry, let me start over again. Elliot Malin is the president at Alpine Strategies, where he has worked on drafting and passing into law bills that deal with Holocaust and genocide education. Specifically, having passed legislation that defined genocide within the law to mimic that of the international humanitarian law. He serves as the chair of the Nevada Governor's Advisory Council on the education relating to the Holocaust. And if you all can say that 10 times fast, I will give you a prize, I promise. As well as chair of the Nevada Department of Education Subcommittee on Holocaust and Genocide Education. He serves on the board of Jewish Nevada and on the associate board of the Anti-Defamation League. Elliot has dedicated his career to fighting anti-Semitism, is educating people through the perils of bias, hate, bigotry, through the expansion of Holocaust and genocide studies. As I mentioned, Elliot is going to focus his conversation today on anti-Semitism within our current lives and the misapplication of terms to be used against Jews and the state of education on Holocaust and genocide studies. I do want to say, while we had two esteemed PhDs speak to us before from UNR, Elliot is almost about to graduate from Syracuse University Law. So here's Elliot.
Thank you, Mara. Is this thing on? Can you all? Okay, cool. I do want to actually recognize one person that I see here who was a predecessor of mine as the chair of the Governor's Advisory Council on Education relating to the Holocaust, which is, and I do recognize, a very long name for a government entity. Madeline, we should change that. Shorten it a little bit. But Judy Schumer is in the back and deserves some recognition. I want to start with some positives because, as we know, anti-Semitism is a little bit of a problem right now. Madeline is the director of legislative affairs for the governor. I saw Governor Lombardo on October 9th, 2 days after October 7th, in Las Vegas. The governor pulled me aside and asked me how I was doing. He did this out of the view of most of the people in the crowd, where we also had Senators Masto and Senators Rosen. And he did that as a friend to just check in. And so I think it's really important to recognize that we do have officials that do care about our community. The other thing I want to recognize, now that we're talking about some of our elected officials, both Senators Cortez Masto and Senator Rosen yesterday introduced a bill called the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, are co-introduced it and are co-sponsoring that, which will codify within the law the definition of anti-Semitism to be used by the United States Department of Education, which is really remarkable and really important. And we truly do have two of the best U.S. senators in the country fighting anti-Semitism. So let's get started. Oh, why is it doing that? Like, wait, what happened there? Well, it's not supposed to look like that, or I can't see it all that well. This is the reported anti-Semitic incident in the United States. It might just be the graphic from here.
You can see it there. It's
Okay, perfect. In 2012, it was just under 1,000. In 2022, the report was 3,697 anti-Semitic incidents reported to the Anti-Defamation League. This does not include all of the incidents that go unreported. So I'm going to make a plug right now. Outside, when you leave, there are little flyers on how to report anti-Semitism to the Anti-Defamation League. I dropped them off before this. Please take one and make sure people understand that we do need to report this. It is super important. But we saw before October 7th, and this is why I wanted to use this graphic, that anti-Semitism was already on a rise. In 2022, we were at an all-time high of reported incidents in the United States. But I also want to take another moment to recognize something that I found remarkable after October 7th. Actually, this is the evening of October 7th in Berlin. Jamie, can you read German for us?
It says never again is now.
It says never again is now on the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. And that was a very stark reminder to me about how far we have come since the Holocaust. Now, we do have a definition for anti-Semitism that we use here in Nevada. The Nevada system of higher education was the first system to adopt this. The proclamation outside from the governor also recognizes the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which is an important tool for us, right? One of the reasons why it's so important, especially right now, is that it often encompasses the anti-Zionism that is used as a means of castigating Jews. And I'm going to come back to it in a second, because I think that the next slide will be really poignant from the previous conversation. But right now we are seeing a rise of anti-Semitism that we all associate with being from the very, very far left. And it's alarming. And it all comes from this idea of castigating Israel as this state that is Nazi-like. And we all know that's not true. And so the IRA definition as a tool has become a mechanism for us to talk about where is that line for critique of Israel. You can critique the state of Israel, that's fine. I do it every day. It's when we start to say that Israel doesn't have a right to exist, or there's a double standard being used against Israel, that it becomes a problem. But while we talk about the far left, we also have to talk about the far right. And I too wanted to talk about Charlottesville, unironically. Here in our own community, we also see this same kind of rhetoric. So I'm going to read a quote really fast. Just like the protocols of the elders of Zion, when you infiltrate every single layer of civilization of a society, they put their people in these prominent positions to keep the information from leaking out or to keep their narrative in place. And we are seeing that. That quote was said by a large political donor here in our local community when he was complaining about Donald Trump losing the election in 2020. So it is important to remember that while we see what we're seeing today, that this is not absent from the far right either. We have an individual, and this is a statement by Robert Beadles, and this was made in an entire report done by the Nevada Independent. And I think it's really important to recognize that and see that this rhetoric is still spreading today. I had made a note about the protocols of the learned elders of Zion and how it is used today. And a lot of what Jamie was talking about and showing, the caricatures of Jews we are seeing reemerge today. Now, this says death to Jews, free Gaza. And I'm sure you can all read that. And I want to take a moment to talk about this. This is from Nevada. This is in October in Las Vegas, in a community that's pretty prominent for being having a high population of Jewish Nevadans. So it is important to also understand, while we just talked about this, that we're also seeing this here in our community. And this isn't happening just in Las Vegas. If you were to drive down Virginia Street today, you are in front of Michael and Sons, and you were to stop and look left, if you're going south, at the Stremel Gallery, the same graffiti appears on there, here in Reno. Then we have this from Europe. I apologize, it's a little grainy. It says, please keep the world clean. And it's a person putting a Star of David in a trash can where they are trying to insinuate it to be the flag of Israel. This was a protest in, I want to say, Denmark. The protester was a medical student and ended up getting suspended from school for that. But then we get to other things that we see today. These are the pictures of hostages taken by Hamas on October 7th. And I'm going to make a plug on this later about the topic of genocide, which is a presentation tomorrow at the university that I'm giving a lecture on at 7 p.m. Y'all are invited. It's important to understand what genocide is, because right now we're seeing that Israel, and by and large Jews, are being accused of genocide. If you were to go onto Senator Rosen's Twitter page today on something that has nothing to do with Israel, you will see that she is attacked and accused of committing genocide. As the chair of the Governor's Council, I have received numerous emails accusing myself and the council of committing genocide. I cannot commit genocide. I am an individual here in Reno, Nevada. Genocide has a definition defined under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, Article 2, which defines it as an act with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. What October 7th was genocide. And it would be accurate today to say that the Holocaust is no longer the most recent genocide of Jews. And that's a very hard reality, because there's no real numeric value to genocide. It's the act with the specific intent. It's a dolus specialis, special intent. And that's what that was. And the rhetoric to twist that on these people that have been taken hostage, which, by the way, It's another violation of international law. Fourth Geneva Convention, Article 34 says the taking of hostages is prohibited. It's the easiest one to understand and the shortest. That's the entire article. These are war crimes. These are crimes against humanity that were committed against Jews today. And what we are seeing around the world is the twisting to blame Jews. 73% of Jewish college students have experienced or seen anti-Semitism since the start of the school year, a new survey found. This was published last year. This is after October 7th. And that has led to some very infamous hearings in Congress. Sorry, Jamie, I know that you're a Harvard alum. I don't mean to bash Harvard. Columbia got it today too on Capitol Hill. But this is the now former president of Harvard, Claudine Gay, who, along with the president of Penn and MIT, were brought before Congress in, I want to say, November, to be asked about anti-Semitism and the calls for genocide of Jews on their campuses. Just yesterday, the House of Representatives passed a resolution condemning the use of the phrase from the river to the sea as a call for genocide of Jews, which has become a prominent phrase around the country, around the world, and even here in Reno. And as an anecdote really fast, as you just heard, my final of law school is tomorrow morning. It's wills and trusts, not an exciting topic. I received an email from Syracuse University right after this hearing, and I was called before the Office of Community Standards for bias because I had confronted a student who was misusing the word genocide. And I said, hey, that's not how we use genocide. I actually do have some qualifications to talk about this. And they reported me to the Office of Community Standards. And this is a week after this, and I remember saying to them, did you all remember what happened last week on Capitol Hill? Do we want to recreate that for Syracuse? Because what's going on right now is a means of trying to censor a Jewish student who spoke up against this, and that's not okay. So, thank you. It was a very short conversation. They decided they didn't want to have it. So this is the 10-year review of anti-Semitic incidents. And in 2022, there were 3,697. Between October 7th and January 7th, there were 3,291 reported incidents. Almost the entire previous year's worth of statistics. That is alarming. The Harvard Harris poll, let's give kudos to Harvard now. They've been doing this poll monthly. And I'm a bit of a nerd, so I love to track data. And one of the data points I've been tracking has been this one right here, the 18 to 24-year-olds. The question is, do you think that Jews as a class are oppressors and should be treated as oppressors, or is that a false ideology? 67% of 18 to 24-year-olds decided that Jews are oppressors here in the United States. This is another plug for the Governor's Council. We recently did a survey that is not yet released to the public, but I know the results, measuring the Nevadans' competency of Holocaust, what genocide is, and doing a measurement of how Nevadans feel about various groups. And one thing that stood out to me was the rate at which Nevadans today harbor anti-Semitic feelings. But I will also caveat this with, it's equally as bad for Islamophobic feelings. And so I would be remiss if I didn't mention that. This is a measure of Facebook and Twitter/X, or X, formerly Twitter, I don't know what to call it, between September 30th and October 13th. Anti-Semitic posts spiked on October 7th. which is fascinating to me because days before that, weeks before that, Elon Musk and the Anti-Defamation League were in a bit of a tussle. And we saw a spike of anti-Semitism from that. And then this happened. And that, again, is quite alarming. We had 8,873 incidents last year alone, which was an 873% increase over the decade. As of right now, there's an average of one anti-Semitic incident every hour in the United States. Between October 7th and December 31st, there were 5,204 anti-Semitic incidents reported. And I opened by pointing out that in 2022, there were 3,697. In about 2 months, we saw 5,204. 140% increase in total anti-Semitic incidents. I'm shockingly grateful that it happened at the end of the year and not the beginning. 237% increase at Jewish institutions like this one alone. Bomb threats were made against synagogues, Jewish community institutions around the country back in December, and our state was not immune from that either. 321% increase of anti-Semitic incidents on college campuses. 1,000% increase in bomb threats. But I also want to talk about something that's a positive for this community. This is a picture right after the Tree of Life shooting in 2018. And I bring this picture back. It's at Temple Emmanuel. Rabbi, you were there. Councilwoman, you were there. And I remember this because our community came together. And it was a majority of the people in that room were not Jewish. And that is still something I see today. Because I'm about to talk about something a little bad again with our city. But it's still something we see with our community members today. This was a flyer posted about protesting the city of Reno for giving $3,000 to Jewish Nevada and then accusing Jewish Nevada of committing genocide. Now, again, Jewish Nevada has no capability to act to commit genocide. That's part of the elements. There's two elements. It's an act with the intent, right? So Jewish Nevada could not do that. They were upset that the mission statement for Jewish Nevada, the only statewide community organization for Jews in Nevada, was the continuity of life for Jews in Nevada, the United States, around the world, and in Israel, in Am Yisrael. And so they came out and said, why has Reno City Council not recognized Israel's ongoing genocide of Palestinians or called for a ceasefire? Partially because it's nothing the city can do to call for a ceasefire. It's not possible. And I hate to break it to them, it's not going to affect it. But what they did do was attack our local Jewish community. And in that same vein, we did get the donation. And the entire council landed up voting for it, even though that one member previously pulled it. Because that $3,000 paid for an event like this tonight, locally. And I think it's important to recognize that and recognize the work of our council, our local electeds, and say that I went over a lot of bad statistics so far, and things look bleak. But we do have friends. We do have friends locally. We do have friends in the governor's mansion. We do have 2 friends in the United States Senate from Nevada and 4 in the House of Representatives from Nevada. And that's a very important thing. And again, I want to mention another thing. While we are talking about anti-Semitism, it is also important to remember the rise of Islamophobia right now. Because I'm talking about the now. There has been a double of Islamophobic incidents since October 7th, reported by CARE. the Center for American Islamic Relations. So while I know that we as Jews are in pain, it is also important to remember that our Muslim neighbors are also in pain, and that we have to sometimes band together because it's not our Muslim neighbors blaming us for all of this. And so please keep that in mind. Am Yisrael Chai. And my final one is, we got to bring them all home.
Thank you, Elliot. Thank you all for your comments. So I know you all probably have some questions, and I don't want to take away from that time, but I do want to ask a couple of questions, maybe to get the conversation going, and then Catherine and I are going to go into the audience and ask, have people ask questions. We have about 20 minutes in order to do that. So I have a question. I think you all hit on it, but I would like to hear it, like, just if you can take a moment and think of one good thing that happened within the periods of time that you spoke about. What can we take as a ray of sunshine, or, you know, a positive out of the time periods that you spoke about? And we can go in any order, because I see Jamie's collecting his thoughts.
Well, that's easy for me, because if you'd asked my grandparents about living during this time, who had escaped pogroms, they would have thought they had a pretty good deal in the United States. And they never even referred to specific places. When I was a kid, I thought there was this place in Eastern Europe called the Old Country.
I guess quickly, since I have all of Jewish history through 1945, but I'm really drawn to the 19th century, this century of innovations in anti-Semitism that will ultimately lead to genocide and the Holocaust. The 19th century is also when we get a rebirth of Jewish religious practice. The movement, the Reform movement, comes out of Central Europe. The innovations of the synagogue, the Ashkenazi synagogue in Amsterdam, in Hamburg. This last summer, I was at the grave of Abraham Geiger, one of the founders of the Reform movement in Germany. In fact, I pulled off my shelf today. I saw this on the way here. Actually, I show my students this, but the first prayer book written by a Jewish woman for other Jewish women in Germany was published by Fanny Neuda. Her husband was rabbi, but he died fairly young, in 1855. This is a new form of thinking about religious practice, innovations in Judaism itself. The same time the anti-Semites are rethinking things, they're innovations that bring us here to the Reform movement that exists today.
Dang, that was powerful. I mentioned a lot about our friends, but I think we also have to look at ourselves a little bit. The pride of being Jewish for a lot of our community members has never been higher. And I think that's really, really important, especially, I don't know where Matt Levin went, who is our director of Hillel. I'm really proud of our students at the university, but not just this university, but around the country, who've embraced their Judaism through very difficult times.
Thank you. I have one more question, but I'm going to save it for the last question. So why don't Catherine and I are going to go into the audience. Doug just raised his hand first, so I'm going to go to him. You have to put it really close to your mouth, okay?
Yeah, Ellie, my question's for you, because you briefly touched on it in your opening comment, and on a slide. The difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And so I'm just wondering if you could expand on it. Is there confusion in that? Is there an overlap? Or, how does that all around? Because in my mind, like I think you touched on it, it's, one is the Israeli state, the Jewish state, versus, anti-Semitism and the Jew as a person, as a religious being.
Sure. Under the definition of IRA, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Under Congressional Act, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Look, there is one Jewish state in the world. One. It's very small. There are 15 million Jews. We are still a smaller population than we were in 1935 today. And it's important to remember that 9 million of the 15 million Jews live in Israel. And so the idea that Israel doesn't have a right to exist because it's the Jewish state is anti-Semitism, and that is what anti-Zionism is. And again, it's very important to note that people can critique Israel. There's valid ways to do that, right? They can just say the government sucks, and that's valid. But to say that it doesn't have the right to exist is anti-Semitism.
Hello and thank you. I have a question for each of you to see in your opinion. There are times that we choose to engage in a discussion or we choose not to, but just want to say something. In your opinions, whether it be a book, an Instagram page or something, if you wanted to say to somebody, just look at that, or if somebody said it was a little bit open to another opinion, what do you think is the best direction or the best medium to possibly say, just read this, just look at this, in your opinions? Thank you.
I'm going to give you a quick story to answer that question. 2 weeks after October 7th was the first protest here in Reno. I went with Matt, and my sign said, Hamas wants dead Jews, which is a factually correct statement. The first thing I heard was F the Jews. The second thing was a call for genocide of Jews. A gentleman came across the street to talk to me, and he was very polite, and he just wanted to ask questions. And I think that was the best medium that we could have had that conversation, is just a respectful conversation, showing empathy for one another. But also, it's really hard right now because people want to be in a bubble of reading what they think is true, but not understanding what they're reading might have a bias to it. I've a little bit different. I've read a lot of things from the United States Military Academy because it's helpful. These are people that are analyzing warfare under the context of the law and what we're seeing. And so I've been using the Modern War Institute at West Point.
So for me, I can't remember the name of the book, but the commentator on MSNBC, Rachel Maddow, has a book about the rise of the right in the interwar period that contextualizes what I was talking about at a more local level. And she's really good, and she does her homework. And she writes well.
I don't know if this is a good answer because today, actually, just a few hours ago in my office, I had a student come in who said she's never been into the library or read a physical book since high school, and she's a senior. I also had a student the other day ask me how much it costs to check out books at the library at UNR. So I feel like any book is fine these days for students. But if anyone is actually interested in Jewish history in the 19th century, there's a German historian named he's an American, but his name's Helmut Walter Smith. It's called The Butcher's Tale. This old idea of the blood libel comes back in the 19th century. He talks about in 1900 how a corpse washes a boy is found dead, and explores how things had changed between the medieval period and the new. It's called The Butcher's Tale. It's a really interesting. I assign it in my classes. It's always a fascinating read, although I'm kind of horrified that none of the students are reading books anymore. I'm going to make them go to libraries in the future. So any book, if you're under the age of 25, as far as I'm concerned.
Said the protocols.
Well, yeah.
Does anybody else have a question? Oh, now we got some hands. You gotta talk real close.
Thank you very much. I'm reflecting on the there, then, now, and thinking about this transition from this clannish, xenophobic behavior to the religious anti-Semitism, and to now my experience reading, paying attention, and that I've experienced myself, seems to not be based in this clannish, xenophobic type behavior, nor in a religious setting only, although that's there too. This civil rights, human rights, social justice, whatever we want to call on that spectrum, right, left. Elliot, you touched on that. So would all of you reflect, is this a new layer, or is it just the regurgitation of these old pieces?
As a historian, we don't know. This is, this really sad thing when you're in the midst of history. We only get to handle it when it's done. So whether or not this is new, there is a historian named Jeff Herf who's worked a lot on anti-Semitism today. He thinks that actually after Nazi racial anti-Semitism, there's Islamist anti-Semitism. So he makes this argument is influential today. I don't know if I personally agree, but he is convincing to a lot of people. So maybe we are in a new era. I know some scholars think that.
Jamie said to me the other day that he thinks of anti-Semitism historically as a kind of smorgasbord that you can pick and choose things and recreate them in new ways. And it seems to me when I saw that statistic about Jews being oppressors, that really struck me as being, echoes of the protocols of the elders of Zion, because this idea of the Jews like being the puppet masters and the Rothschilds and controlling banking and all these various things seems to me to be something that is still very much prevalent.
So I do read books and I take notes. I'm hoping to read fun books soon, not law books. But there's a few quotes that stuck out to me from my colleagues up here. One was, they're doing it again. One was, Jews are citizens of nowhere. James said, all of the old tropes can come back. And all of those are coming back. There was a picture that Dennis, you brought up, and it was of the Dearborn newspaper. And since October 7th, it is no secret that Dearborn has not been a very pleasant place for Jews in America. Some of the things that I have seen from Dearborn have been Zionism is fascism, Zionism is Nazism, and it's this downplay of rhetoric to try to minimize Jewish life, Jewish feelings, and try to castigate us as the new Nazis. And that's quite alarming, but it also goes back to all of those things with the protocols. So in my mind, it's 1935 again.
So can I just add a bit of local history? Henry Ford's Dearborn, which was overwhelmingly Protestant, and Jews knew that there was no chance for them, even if they wanted to move there, to do so, now has one of the largest concentrations of Arab Americans in the United States. It's really kind of ironic. Henry Ford would have equally have hated the current version. But as Eliot says, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose, the more things change, the more they're the same. Anti-Semitism nonetheless.
Eliot, I like your comment about how you have friends. For somebody who's not of Jewish heritage, but considers myself a friend, I have many friends. What are the best ways that I and we, not of your heritage, can show that friendship and support?
When you see something that is anti-Semitic, and not just anti-Semitic, we're going to go back to Islamophobic, racist, anything like that, speak up. The Holocaust didn't happen necessarily in a bubble. There were a lot of people that went along with it. And the best way to prevent the next genocide is to speak up before it can ever happen. And thank you for being a friend.
I'm curious. I imagine that all three of you get questions in your personal lives or in cocktail conversations about this topic. That is very layered and very nuanced and probably could result in you saying, well, do you have I don't know, a semester? How do you, if someone asks you a question about anti-Semitism or about Hamas or October 7th, I mean, do you have some thoughts on shorter ways to respond other than, do you have a semester?
That's such a hard question. All right. 2 nights ago, instead of studying for finals, I decided I want to write another law review article about genocide. And then basically, long story short, I'm accusing Iran of genocide, actually, for financing, training, and ordering proxies to kill Jews. But look, I think that there's a lot of ways to look at this right now. Congressman Richie Torres on X, Twitter, whatever it is, has been a really, really good advocate, but using his space in a very concise way. And I've used that quite a bit as well.
I guess what I would try to do is try to create a broader conversation about it. And I mean, you can't look at October 7th in isolation. You'd have to look at the entire history of the region and just how entirely complex it is. I mean,
you just said, can I have 2 semesters? Basically, more than one. I'm going to do
it's like a
not only
PhD.
Jewish history, but all of the history of the Middle East.
So I teach the Irish Troubles, which I think is displaced Judaism, quite frankly, because so many of the conflicts in Ireland are at least analogous, not connected, but are at least analogous to what's happened in Israel-Palestine. And what I try to get my students to do is think about how to solve it, not try to place blame. Placing blame goes nowhere. But I do know from studying the Irish Troubles, there never would have been a Good Friday Agreement until both sides acknowledged the other side had a point of view.
I don't really have much to add. I think Dennis has 2 semesters. I probably have him go for 3. So historians aren't good to ask for short, pithy answers. We like to go way back in time.
Thank you for the fascinating talk. And I understand more clearly when, where, who, what, but I'm still at a loss to say, why do people hate Jews?
It's really easy, as I think the best way to think about that. They're the historians, but I would like to take us back again. Let's go back to Jamie's talk about the plague, right? Jews were different. We didn't get the plague. We didn't die from the plague. And the ramification of that is that we were accused of kidnapping and murdering Christian babies and baking their blood into matzah. And so I think it's one of the reasons is that people look for a scapegoat because it's the easy thing to do. But the historians might know more than me.
That's a tough one. I mean, I think there really is no easy answer, but I would concur with Elliot that that scapegoating is really, really important. I don't want to go too much into Jamie's territory, but when Europe transitioned from an agricultural society to a modern society and an industrial society, so many people were leaving the land and going into cities, but Jews were not like that because Jews were already an urban people. And therefore they adjusted to the urban world in ways that was much more difficult for other kinds of people. And I think that a kind of jealousy might have taken place that also is related to scapegoating. After all, it's like, why is the world not working for me and it's working for you?
This is not a very good answer. It's probably not what I should say, but my father was a Presbyterian minister. I grew up in the church, and I actually think the problem is actually early Christianity and the relationship between anti-Semitism becomes virulent when Christianity decides the problem is it almost, so in Galatians, it's Galatians 2:11 through 14. Paul says, what all Christians have to do is conquer is the desire to Judaize within themselves. It's almost like every single Christian has a Jew inside of themselves they have to conquer. And this idea, when you believe that, when this is what your bishops are telling you, the Jew becomes the permanent other. You're conquering your inner Jew, and then it has nothing to do with real Jews, but Christians start projecting that they are the other. And I think there's something with Christianity, with Jews being the other, and then it continuing over time. If you just look at Jewish history, in the Muslim countries, Jews were actually much better treated. If you look in Muslim Spain, much better treated than under Christian rulers, where they expelled. So I don't say Christianity is why anti-Semitism exists, but there is something with that relationship that makes Jews a permanent other, that when scientific racism comes up, we've been hating Jews for so long, we've been trying to rid ourselves of our inner Jew. Who do we see as the other? It's the Jews. And I think there's something with the advent of Christianity. It's not only modernity, and Jews become almost the permanent other in so many of these societies.
I think we're very lucky to have in Nevada have the senators and people in Carson City and the local politicians. But what do we do with politicians who claim to support, but really support more white supremacists and keep giving fodder to that? How do we handle that? If it were that easy, we would have done it already.
How long do you have?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. 2 semesters. We can make that 3. No, look, it's important to remember that what we were talking about, and again, seeking friends and seeing empathy, is to be in touch with our elected officials as well. If they don't hear from us, they don't know. So it's incumbent upon us to reach out, talk to them, tell them what's going on. And as Madeline, you know this, every day in Carson City, that's what I do. Most of my days there is talking to electeds about the Jewish community in Nevada. And so I'm happy to see where our legislature is at. We don't see that in Carson City today. We don't see that really on our city council. A little bit on the county commission, that's a whole nother story. Or within our federal delegation, the governor's mansion, or any other constitutional office. Just talk to them, because it can change the entire discourse.
I actually want to punt, but I think that for me, the conversation about anti-Semitism has to be a much larger conversation, because it's more than just being about Jewish, it's about being American. And there are so many, just like in the 30s and 40s, Jews were being lumped with communists and African Americans as the other. There is a kind of othering going on today as well that's not strictly about anti-Semitism. And we all fall together, or we all stay together.
I agree.
I think we have time. We have time for one more question from the audience. Oh, okay, we got it right there.
I wanted to thank you, Elliot, for some of what you said, and I'll get into that. I thought about not saying anything right now and just staying silent, but because I didn't want to draw more stigma to a painful situation that I had been through with my young son. And he's not alone. There's a lot happening in the schools. We see what's happening at Harvard, what's happening at Columbia, students barricading themselves in libraries at Cooper Union. So we need to not kid ourselves that it's not happening at earlier stages of education. And the thing about young kids is they aren't always so forthcoming, especially as they become teenagers. And I know there's painful experiences out there. They want to just brush it off, or thinking that trying to bring any more attention is just going to make it worse. So I'd encourage parents and grandparents in the audience to really question or try to understand what your children are going through, so that we can more aggressively root that out in the school system, who I feel, because of our smaller numbers, doesn't look like the way this evening, but because of our smaller numbers, would rather just brush the issue aside and feign a willful ignorance to the situation.
Let me tell you a quick story in relation to that, though. I have a friend. He lives in San Francisco. His name is Ahmed Al-Khatib. He is from Gaza. He and I spoke. His family is in Gaza. He lost 30 family members in this war. And all he cared about was getting aid to civilians. I called Molly Rose, who's sitting up here in the front, and said, Molly Rose, we need to chat. I'm a deep Zionist, but there's something going on here. We got to fix this. This guy's become a very good friend of mine. Molly Rose took that to Senator Rosen. March 5th was the first airdrop of American humanitarian aid into Gaza. A lot of that happened because of that conversation. I'm not technically supposed to tell that to many people, so a little bit of a secret, guys. But a lot of that has to do with the idea of empathy and having a friend, right? I have family and friends that were hurt in this war. I have friends who were taken hostage, friends who lost their entire families. But I have to remember that there are other people, there are innocent people, and we have to show that empathy. And part of that is also having the conversation with our kids to remember that too. Also, thanks, Senator Rosen, on that.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have one final question, and then I know Jill wants to come up here and say thank yous, but I have a couple of announcements, if that's okay, after my final question. So if y'all can just like blurt it out really fast, because everyone's getting hot and wants to have some nibbles, I can tell. What is one aha or takeaway you'd like us as participants to leave with today, to go out into our communities, to make a difference, to engage others? I hear you, Elliot, so loudly. You know, it's empathy and inclusion and all that. But is there more? And Dennis and Jamie, also to you.
Anti-Semitism is about not being educated. Education and educating any way you can, whether it's friends or institutionally or colleagues or whatever form it takes, that is the way to change people's thinking.
I think I've really already said it, that anti-Semitism has a history. It's changed over time, but because it's not permanent, there could be a future where there is no more anti-Semitism. And that's the world that I hope for.
I love that comment.
We're going to end it on that one. I'm just going to talk about empathy again, so that was perfect.
Yeah, I think that was an amazing comment. That is the aha I'm leaving with here. So I just want to say a couple of announcements. First of all, as Elliot said, if you go to outside as you're exiting, actually, before I do that, I have to acknowledge the fact that Rabbi Evan Yakar came down from the lake. He wasn't here when we said our acknowledgements of dignitaries and elect, all the important, not that we're not all important. I'll just stumble over my words, but Evan joined us, and I really want to say thank you for doing that. We appreciate it. Elliot mentioned that there's flyers outside as you go towards the, I know, give me a minute. There's flyers outside that will talk to you about reporting things to the ADL. There's also a huge poster and flyers for the Day of Remembrance, Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day on April 6th at the Atlantis. I'm sorry, we already passed April 6th. May 6th, I got the place right. So please look at that. Also, we're having a Jewish Nevada Film Festival, a Northern Nevada Jewish Film Festival, and so information is there about that. And we're having our annual Heritage Day at the ballpark. I have really cool swag, so you want to go to that. And these are ways for us to come together, to be community, to show strength, and to make sure that those people who think that there is anti-Semitism or want to act on anti-Semitism see us as a strong community. So I encourage you to participate more. And tomorrow night, sorry, thank you, Elliot. Tomorrow night at 7 at at the Joe, at the Crawley is Elliot's talk on genocide, fact or fiction. I'll be there. If you want to know more, you can find that out at the jewishnevada.org website. And I want to say, I believe Jamie and Dennis will be here if you want more questions. Are you? Yeah, and Elliot's staying too, which we're really grateful for since he has his final. Thank you, Mara. And thank you to our panel. And I want to thank everyone who came here tonight. And a recurrent question has been, what can we do? What we can do is be here and other activities like we are tonight. Be together as a community. We are a very diverse audience tonight, and we all have a lot of friends here. And that's what we can do, is show up, talk, exchange ideas, have coffee. 2 weeks ago, we had a comedy night that Pastor Tom hosted where we told interfaith comedy jokes. And it was 65 of us got together and we learned about each other's cultures and faiths through humor. That's what we can do. And also what our panel said is, if you see something, say something, no matter any hate that's involved with it. On your way out through the lobby, you'll find a printed resource flyer that we've provided with numerous opportunities for you to look into other areas for exploration. And I wanted to thank our panel and Mara. And our gift to you is a book called What We Need to Talk About is Antisemitism. It's by Rabbi Diane Farsko, and it was just written in 2023.
Oh, good. Thank you.
So it's very early history for. Please join us. Across the lobby is our reception area. We've got food, refreshments, meet and greet, and everyone will be there to answer questions for you. We thank you so much for coming tonight, and shalom.
I thought we did great together.
I thought so too. Yeah, it was good.
I loved your pictures. It was actually it worked really well. It was really good.
Oh,
Sure.
yeah.
I also have a fun anecdote for you too.
Oh, no. It's nice to meet you. Thanks. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hold on, Molly Rose. Let's take a picture. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
I'm a Presbyterian minister.
Hi.
Yeah.
Oh.
I think I organize entertainment comedy.
I try sometimes. Hopefully I have a lot of good words tomorrow morning.
Yeah, so if you
John's Gospel.
Wills and Trusts.
So if you look at the original Greek in Galatians, it's the only time the Greek that's Judaized is ever used. And gets Galatians, yeah.
Cub fan, huge baseball fan. I know that baseball is biblical.
I did not know that.
Okay, so there's like one of the first.
Hello, this is U.S.
Is the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning.
There is.
The rest is commentary.
That's amazing.
So still bitter about the 1945 series.
I actually have a New York Times photograph